I wanted to start out just by saying I think we have to all admit that Republicans as a party are committed to criminal oligarchy and to white racial dominance. And we need to see more of our elected officials admit that out loud as well. The things that I see as essential for obtaining democracy, I'll put in the chat here. I'll put a few things in the chat, so be ready to copy paste if you like to hang on to some of the stuff. But I'll also hold it up here. This is the flyer that I brought to the Deadline for Democracy rallies that we Indivisible East Bay and Indivisible San Francisco hosted a week and a half ago. And it's hard to see how without these things we make it as a country. We need to end the filibuster, pass the For the People Act, expand the Supreme Court, enact DC statehood, and get to the bottom of January 6th and get real consequences for it. And to talk about this, in terms of ending the filibuster, I do want to say that a simple majority of 50 Democratic senators plus the vice president does in fact have the legitimate procedural power to alter the Senate rules. So they can do this. We actually had, in addition to the Deadline for Democracy rallies that we also had rallies for commemorating John Lewis. And we also had meetings in virtually and in person with our senators. And I'll throw in the chat here also some coverage of what we've been up to as well. So feel free to check out those links afterward here. And it also has the links up top to the Indivisible National Organization, which is a loose association. The Indivisible National Organization is its own political action committee. And then the local Indivisibles do their own thing. Like we said, I'm a member of Indivisible San Francisco and Indivisible East Bay as well. So going back to the filibuster, we met with Senator Dianne Feinstein about it. In the past, she has articulated that she does not think democracy is in jeopardy. Her staff and her messaging has been at odds at times in terms of her willingness to consider changes to the filibuster. What the most recent thing that her staff told us last week, directly and in person, was that she was open to changes, but she is not going to lead on it. She would take Senator Schumer's direction, but she would not be the leader. So that's pretty rough for the senior senator from the biggest state in the country. Really unacceptable, honestly. We do hear some good things from our other senator, Senator Padilla, who was the former Secretary of State of California. But I need to, I'd need to see more action for him in terms of persuading his colleagues. So things are tough in that regard. And if we don't get rid of the filibuster, which is a larger pattern of Democrats not using the power available to them as in an assertive way, then it's hard to see how we pass any of a sensible Democratic agenda and literally save the country. To go to the second issue, so passing the filibuster I think is pretty clearly what it takes to pass all the other voting protections we need. And we didn't name our rally's Deadline for Democracy lightly, because in August is coming up the supposed recess of Congress, which is still scheduled to happen, incredibly. And also in August will be the release of the census data, which was already corrupted under the Trump administration. There's no program by the Democrats to attempt to correct it. And once that is out, then states will start redistricting, and the clock is ticking for the 2022 elections. And we voted our hearts out in 2018 and 2020, and to not have any other provisions in place to help us in 2022 and then in 2024 could be catastrophic. And if the Republicans win back power in the country, I don't think we're coming back as a democracy. So this is do or die, basically. And we need to see our Congress people act like it is. The third thing was expand the federal courts. Even if the For the People Act passes and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and other similar measures, the Supreme Court could still overturn them. The lower courts can overturn them, and the Supreme Court could let it stand. And given the way the Supreme Court has acted in eviscerating the Voting Rights Act and all the way back to 2000 in terms of overthrowing that election with a total fiat ruling, they'll do it. And so we really need our Congress to expand the courts. And unfortunately, right now, that's a fairly fringe position in Congress. And it's hard to see how, again, we make it through the next 3 years without that happening. The last one is enact statehood for the District of Columbia. We do have a district that's larger than some states that does not have representation in Congress, and it's pretty unfair that it does, and it completely unbalances the already unfair Senate. So again, that's 50 votes plus the vice president to break a tie in the Senate, and then the majority in the House, and the president could sign it, but we are not seeing that action yet. So things I'm looking for in terms of signs that that things are moving in a good direction in terms of what the Democrats are willing to do. One is to embrace confrontation, stop confrontation aversion, and also raise the stakes and not diminish them. So you see that with things like the reconciliation bill, where we'll let the bipartisan folks pass their bill, and then we'll pass the stuff we actually want in the reconciliation bill. It's a workaround for the filibuster. Reconciliation itself is just a workaround for the filibuster, but they could end the filibuster and not have to deal this, not give people a bipartisan fig leaf to actually come out and openly confront. Any one senator could actually force this issue if they came out against reconciliation as a hamstrung process that hampers the way that we pass bills, and that would force the infrastructure bill, for example, into regular order, and therefore Biden, with his Build Back Better reputation, would have to come out against the filibuster, which he has not done, in order to get that bill passed, if such a thing were done. So that's one example of raising the stakes. One senator could do that, or even a small block of House Democrats could do that if they came out against any reconciliation bill. So I'm looking for moves like that raise the stakes and embrace the confrontation. Another thing I'm looking for is for our politicians to say and do things that unsettle white people, Christians, men, straight people. Things like abolish ICE and defund the police, I think, actually do shock the public out of complacency and are meaningful public persuasion. Also, there's no evidence that those things that were said by activists and not politicians, there's no evidence that those things diminished Democratic chances in elections at all, especially as proven by the victories in the Georgia Senate for Georgia's senators. Another thing I'm looking for, as mentioned before, is Democrats assertively wielding official authority and not pushing things off on some supposed other authority. Another thing is real accountability for those who gave the orders for things like the January 6th insurrection, or things like for Congress to impeach Louis DeJoy of the U.S. Postal Service and the USPS board. We've not seen any move toward that. Another thing I'm looking for is to not manufacture non-existent Republican good intentions. Pleading with Republicans to do the right thing, I don't see that as productive. I see that as counterproductive in terms of helping them give the impression that they even have that potential. Another thing I'm looking for is for rank and file Democrats to go rogue from leadership, because given all the things we've talked about, it's pretty clear leadership is committed to this fairly establishment direction of things. They are not acting as though we're in the emergency that it is. And so for people like in summer of 2019, when a lot of rank and file Democrats started to come out for impeachment in the face of Speaker Pelosi and others being against it, that would be a really good sign. I'm looking for cohesive moral messages and overt ideology, not just a laundry list of nice things. And for basically to acknowledge political meaning and the meaning of the efforts that all of us put into winning these elections, and what that means in terms of what our government should do for us. Another thing we should do is not pre-compromise ourselves. So we get mad at the Democrats for pre-compromising with the Republicans. Let's not overly constrain what we say in order to supposedly seem reasonable to Democrats. You be an advocate for yourself. And finally, I'm looking for Democrats acting in their partisan self-interest and proudly for good. Not like we've seen from Speaker Pelosi saying it's a shame that we have to do this special committee for January 6th. Like, they should be proud to defend the American democracy. I have a whole bunch of theories as to why Democrats don't fight in terms of preserving the current economic and racial hierarchy, commitment to the existing power structure, and things like ideological commitment to neoliberal capitalism, even psychological conflict aversion, perhaps, or fear that if the oligarchs are challenged, they'll flip the table on society. even to the point where leadership wouldn't want to win by challenging people that way. It's kind of like the modern democratic leadership being against any new FDR. So hopefully we can change some of those things. So I mentioned what Indivisible is doing. Now I want to throw into the chat some recommendations of what we all can do. I'm sure most of you have already either done many of these things or have different ideas or have thought of these things before. It really does matter to make some noise to your representatives. I mean, in that meeting with Senator Feinstein's staff, they brought up explicitly the counts on how much mail and how many calls they're getting and so forth. Another thing to do is to support more left and ethnically diverse primary candidates with campaigning and donations. So that goes for John and E's campaign, that goes for all kinds, especially outfits like the Justice Democrats that were one of the main supporters of people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Cori Bush, Ilhan Omar, and others who are really changing the political dynamic in this country. Another thing to do is to write letters to the editor and spread news and views on local media, as many of you are already doing, but it really does make a difference. Embrace your group and reach out to people in other groups, really organize here. Take time off, forget about politics for a little bit and then come back. Remember that you need that break, and we need you healthy so that you can be in the struggle too. Kind of think for a second, what would you have advised someone in a burgeoning fascist country to do? Because that's where we're at, and things are difficult and going to get more difficult, I believe, as push comes to shove.
I wanted to say that I'm wondering about Senator Feinstein, if she's leaving anything at this point. I mean, we've heard the rumors about her mental status, and so her stance makes sense to me that she would maybe follow along, but I don't know that she's doing any leaving. And so I'm wondering, my first question is, has the other California senator been approached? And then the second thing is, while I understand how the filibuster is standing in the way, I also understand that while he was president, Trump wanted the filibuster done away with so that he could ram through all the ideas that his group had. And I wonder if in the long run, we would come to regret it.
I really like to address the second question head on, because I hear this exact perspective from many very experienced activists, and I do appreciate that. There's an alternative way to look at it, and that's like, what if the Democrats in 2009, when Obama came into power and they had a majority in the Senate, had they eliminated the filibuster then? What would it look like today? And so it's I mean, there's the fact that the Senate is already anti-democratic. And so the filibuster allows senators of a small fraction of the country to block everything from happening, which sabotages a Democratic president and then leads to the potential for a Republican victory. I do hear you in terms of, like, if we do lose, then it'll be easier for Republicans to pass things. If Republicans really wanted to, they can eliminate the filibuster in a moment as well. And I do think that the voters should get what they look for, get what they voted for. In terms of, I think many moderate Democrats find the filibuster awfully convenient and are hugely in support of it, as you hear from them, in part because it preserves things the way they are, and honestly preserves a white supremacist and capitalist oligarchical power structure. So I hear the defensive need to hang on to whatever power we've won in the past, supposedly, but it was pioneered by John Calhoun, and I think it still serves the same purpose. And it does take a leap in democracy in order to remove it. It's true. Leap of faith, sorry.
My question is regarding the voter suppression laws that have been already passed in many states. What can we do about it? I know we're a bit stuck with the Supreme Court rulings right now. I know we have the federal bills with the For the People Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, but that's in Congress. What are your, I guess, views on how we can take our power back to protect voting rights?
There are some direct actions you can take. One is to get a hold of friends and family in other states with senators who have influential votes. and it's going to be awkward for people who aren't into politics. But at some point, given how dire things are, it's worth it. So please have those awkward conversations, convince them to call their senator, give them all the information they need, so it's easy for them. Just like, here's the number, here's what we're saying. If you agree, please do call. Be persuasive. You know these folks. So another thing you can do is, if you look at our calls to action through our local indivisible groups, Indivisible San Francisco, Indivisible East Bay, Indivisible Sonoma, YOLO, all these different groups, you'll find actions to call people in other states so that they'll call their senators. So we actually run phone banks for other people to call senators, and I highly recommend joining those. They're actually pretty cool. It's pretty cool to connect to people you don't even know and get them excited about politics. So those are 2 actions you can personally take. Otherwise, make some noise.
Okay.
This ties in directly to the comments that were made just now regarding elections. And it seems to me, from observing, that most of the passion and effort comes out in cases where elections are very hotly contested. And that's where the volunteers, unless they're kind of, committed activists who are working round the clock or all the time or most of the time, most people tend to come out on the occasion of elections. And what I'm wondering about is, I'm getting messages almost every day asking for contributions for people who are newer, younger candidates who are running for election against established Republicans, and in some cases against established Democrats, but who are not necessarily what we would call progressive or radical. And so I'm wondering, what about the strategy of supporting them? How do people feel about that? Give $1 to each one of these candidates who is, running against the Republicans or running against establishment Democrats, whether or not they themselves happen to be what we would call radical or progressive Democrats. How do you feel about that?
That's a question for everyone.
Yeah, especially for Larry, I think, but for everybody who works in elections.
Okay,
just
panel.
say something real quick first, I guess. I would recommend supporting organizations like Justice Democrats or the PCCC. I forget what that's called, Progressive Change Campaign Committee. In California, there's also Courage. Courage It's just called Courage or Courage California. But especially Justice Democrats are very out there in terms of pushing for more left, more diverse candidates. And they're very direct about challenging the Democratic leadership, which a lot of people are reticent to do. I gotta say, among Democratic activist circles, the main impediment to my activism is people's knee-jerk approval for whatever the leadership says. And it is incredible how hard it is to get past that. Like in March of 2019, when Pelosi came out of the Washington Post against impeachment, like impeachment activism died for 6 weeks. We had an organization, a grassroots organization pushing for impeachment called By the People, nearly folded in that time, and then came back afterward. So, and people would get angry. You bring it up and people will be super mad. So if anybody has ideas for breaking through that particular impediment, I'm all ears. But I think primary challenges are excellent, and you can support those organizations or the candidates directly. There's that if you remember from New York, Cynthia Nixon challenged Andrew Cuomo, and he was unlikely to lose, but it put the heat on him some. And for a while, people were calling her Governor Cynthia Nixon because he was doing all kinds of progressive things to try to ward her off. So it definitely has an impact.
I agree with the speakers that the U.S. is moving toward fascism, but do you think we have democracy now, when blacks can be killed by cops with impunity, or Latinx families can be split apart by the government, or thousands of whites can die every year from the lack of health care? Capitalism has a dictatorship over us, partly by police terror or the threat of jail, but also by making us think that we live in democracy and that we can make significant permanent change in things without getting rid of capitalism. That's not going to happen. To me, it makes much more sense to be involved in the more acute mass actions like police violence or homelessness or hospital closings or vaccine access rather than elections, and to be consistently reminding people of what they see in those fights. And that is that the only way we can get permanent change is by forcibly overthrowing capitalism and have the working class run society. And this is what Progressive Labor Party's plan is. And anybody who's interested, join us.
Okay, thank you, Michael. And Larry, did you had your hand up before? Did you take it down?
Oh no, yeah, let me respond to that real quick and then say what I was going to say. So I definitely hear that, and I think it takes both. If I follow Sarah Kendzior, like to kind of crib from what she says, like Jared Kushner has not been indicted, and if he does, then we'll know that we've won over the current system and it's possible to work within the system. I would say that Arab Spring is a bit of a cautionary tale in terms of completely overturning things. But if we can build, like what Occupy was starting to do, build an alternative system that we start to live with, perhaps that's one avenue. I was going to say also, just in terms of the challenge that we face, it's not just like we ask nicely and make sense, and then that's enough. Because we are talking about taking unfairly won and horribly unfairly won power away from white people and Christians and men and straight people and everything else. And there was something that if you've heard the journalist Chris Hedges once talked about, he was comparing in the economic sense, taking away the revenues of fossil fuel companies to stopping slave owners from being able to own slaves. And that took a bloody war to stop. And we're in a similar situation, not just with fossil fuels, but with white male Christian power in this country, where they have it and they like it and they don't want to give it up, even subconsciously. That's what the silent majority is supposed to be, right? They don't even realize it, but they don't question it. But there are some plenty not so silent and definitely not majority, but dangerous people out there as well. So that is the challenge before us. I hope we can make it more explicit. And that's part of what I was talking about in terms of not being confrontation averse, and bring it out into the open and address it.